At my grandmother's 70th birthday party, I was arranging the dessert table when I heard her voice drift from the kitchen. "She's not our real granddaughter," she whispered to my Aunt Carol. "I don't know why we keep pretending otherwise." The chocolate cake in my hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy. I stood there frozen, listening as she continued. "Sarah has our blood. Emma doesn't. It's that simple." I set the cake down with trembling fingers and walked back to the living room where everyone was gathered, their laughter echoing off the walls like it belonged to a different world entirely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My cousin Sarah was showing off her engagement ring to a circle of relatives who cooed and congratulated her. My grandmother Patricia beamed with pride, holding Sarah's hand up to catch the light. "Look at that beautiful ring," she announced to the room. "Our Sarah deserves nothing but the best. Our Sarah, never our Emma." I should have seen it coming. The signs had been there my entire life, subtle at first but growing more obvious with each passing year. The way my grandmother's eyes would light up when Sarah entered a room, but barely register my presence. The way she remembered every detail about Sarah's life, her job at the marketing firm, her boyfriend now fiancé Marcus, her apartment in the nice part of town. When people asked about her grandchildren, she would launch into stories about Sarah's accomplishments, her latest promotion, her vacation photos from Europe. When they asked about me, she would offer a polite smile and a vague "Emma's doing well too," before quickly steering the conversation back to safer territory. I used to think it was just personality differences. Sarah was always the outgoing one, the one who knew how to work a room, who could make anyone laugh within minutes of meeting them. She had inherited our family's natural charm, their easy confidence, their ability to make everything look effortless. I was quieter, more thoughtful. I preferred books to parties, deep conversations to small talk. I worked as a librarian at the local elementary school, helping kids discover their love of reading, organizing literacy programs for underprivileged families. It wasn't glamorous work, but it fulfilled me in ways that my family never seemed to understand. My grandmother would introduce Sarah as my granddaughter who works in marketing with such pride in her voice. When she introduced me, it was simply "This is Emma," as if my profession wasn't worth mentioning, as if I wasn't worth the same enthusiasm. Growing up, I had attributed this difference to birth order. Sarah was 2 years older, the first grandchild, the one who had captured my grandmother's heart from the very beginning. She had been the center of attention at every family gathering, the one whose artwork got displayed on the refrigerator, whose school achievements were celebrated with special dinners. I was the afterthought, the second granddaughter who came along when the novelty of grandparenthood had worn off. But standing in that living room, watching my grandmother fuss over Sarah's ring while completely ignoring my presence, I realized it was never about birth order. It was about something much deeper, something that had shaped every interaction we'd ever had. The overheard conversation in the kitchen suddenly made every uncomfortable family moment make perfect sense. The way my grandmother would hug Sarah just a little longer, speak to her just a little softer. The way she would remember Sarah's birthday months in advance, planning elaborate celebrations, while mine often felt like an afterthought, mentioned only when someone else brought it up. Last year, my grandmother had thrown Sarah a surprise party for her 28th birthday, complete with decorations in her favorite colors and a guest list of everyone she cared about. She had spent weeks planning it, calling relatives, ordering a custom cake, making sure every detail was perfect. When my birthday came around 2 months later, I got a card in the mail with $20 inside and a note that said, "Hope you have a nice day." The disparity was so stark that even other family members had started to notice. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, had pulled me aside at last Christmas and asked if everything was okay between my grandmother and me. I had brushed it off, made some excuse about different personalities, but Carol's concerned expression told me she wasn't buying it. She had seen what I had been trying to ignore for years. My mother had died when I was 7 years old, a car accident that had shattered our small family into pieces. My father, overwhelmed with grief and the responsibility of raising a young daughter alone, had leaned heavily on my grandmother for support. She had stepped in immediately, taking care of me after school, helping with homework, making sure I had everything I needed. At the time it had felt like love, like family taking care of family in the wake of tragedy. But looking back now with adult eyes, I could see the difference in how she had treated me compared to Sarah, even then. Sarah's parents were both alive and well, successful professionals who doted on their daughter. She didn't need my grandmother's help the way I did, but she got her attention anyway. I needed that maternal figure desperately after losing my mother so young, but I had to compete for scraps of affection while Sarah was showered with unconditional love. The financial disparity was perhaps the most telling. When Sarah had graduated college, my grandmother had surprised her with a check for $10,000 to help her get established in her career. She had made a big presentation of it at Sarah's graduation party, complete with a speech about investing in the future of such a promising young woman. When I graduated with my library science degree 2 years later, I received a small potted plant and congratulations. When Sarah had needed a down payment for her car, my grandmother had offered to co-sign the loan without hesitation. When I had mentioned struggling with student loan payments, she had suggested I look into consolidation options, as if the solution was simply better financial planning, rather than the kind of family support she freely offered to Sarah. The emotional investment was just as uneven. My grandmother knew Sarah's favorite foods, her allergies, her fears, her dreams for the future. She could tell you the name of Sarah's best friend from college, her favorite restaurant, the vacation destination she had been saving up for. When it came to me, she knew the basics: my job, my apartment address, my father's contact information. But she couldn't tell you my favorite book, my biggest fear, or what I did in my free time. It wasn't malicious exactly. My grandmother wasn't cruel to me. She was polite, cordial, the way you might be with a family friend or a distant relative. She remembered my birthday, attended my graduation, acknowledged my presence at family events, but there was an emotional distance there, a wall that I had never been able to breach, no matter how hard I tried. I had tried everything over the years to win her approval, her attention, her love. I had volunteered to help with family events, shown up early to assist with preparation, stayed late to help clean up. I had brought thoughtful gifts for holidays, remembered important dates, sent cards and photos to keep her updated on my life. I had shared my achievements with her, hoping to see that same pride light up her face the way it did for Sarah. Nothing had worked. No amount of effort on my part could bridge the gap between us, could earn me the same place in her heart that Sarah occupied so naturally. I had begun to wonder if there was something fundamentally wrong with me, some deficiency in my personality that made me less lovable, less worthy of attention. I had blamed myself for not being charming enough, successful enough, interesting enough to capture my grandmother's interest. But now, with her whispered words still echoing in my ears, I understood that it had never been about my shortcomings. It had been about blood, about biology, about some secret that had shaped every interaction we'd ever had. The phrase "not our real granddaughter" kept repeating in my mind, each word carrying implications that made my stomach churn. What did she mean by not real? Was I adopted? Was my father not her biological son? Had my mother had an affair? The questions swirled through my head as I tried to make sense of a lifetime of feeling like an outsider in my own family. Every family photo where I looked slightly different, every comment about how I didn't quite fit the family mold, every moment where I had felt like I was on the outside looking in suddenly took on new significance. I watched my family celebrating around me, their voices a distant hum as my mind raced through possibilities. My father had always been present, loving, supportive. He had never given me any reason to doubt that I was his daughter. But what if there were things he hadn't told me? What if there were family secrets that went deeper than I had ever imagined? The worst part was realizing that my grandmother had known something all along that I didn't. She had treated me differently, not because of anything I had done or failed to do, but because of some truth about my parentage that she had never shared with me. I felt deceived, manipulated, like my entire understanding of myself and my place in the family had been built on lies. Sarah caught my eye from across the room and waved, her smile bright and genuine. She had no idea what I had just overheard, no clue that our grandmother's love for her was connected to something I apparently lacked. Sarah had never had to question her place in the family, never had to wonder why she received different treatment. She belonged in a way that I apparently never would. I forced a smile and waved back, but inside I felt hollow. The birthday party continued around me, but I was no longer part of it. I was an observer watching a family celebration that I apparently had no real claim to. Every hug my grandmother gave, every laugh she shared, every moment of joy felt like it was happening behind glass, visible but unreachable. My Aunt Carol approached me with a concerned expression. "Emma, honey, you look pale. Are you feeling all right?" I realized I must have looked as shaken as I felt. I managed to nod and mumble something about needing some air. She squeezed my shoulder sympathetically, but even her kindness felt complicated now. Did she know the truth too? Had everyone been walking on eggshells around me, careful not to reveal whatever secret my grandmother had been harboring? I excused myself and stepped onto the back porch, where the cool evening air hit my flushed cheeks. The house behind me was warm and bright, filled with the sounds of my family enjoying themselves. But standing outside in the darkness, I had never felt more alone. The woman I had called grandmother for 26 years, the woman I had desperately tried to please and connect with, had just revealed that she saw me as an imposter. The conversation I had overheard played on repeat in my mind. "She's not our real granddaughter. I don't know why we keep pretending otherwise." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Not only did she not consider me family, but she saw acknowledging me as some kind of charade that she was tired of maintaining. I was a burden, an obligation, someone she tolerated out of politeness, rather than love. 26 years of my life suddenly looked different through this new lens. Every birthday, every Christmas, every family gathering, where I had felt slightly out of place now made perfect sense. I hadn't been imagining the distance, the difference in treatment, the feeling that I was always on the periphery. It had all been real, rooted in a truth that everyone else apparently knew but me. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Jessica. "How's the family party? Surviving the chaos?" I stared at the message, not sure how to respond. How do you explain that you've just discovered your entire understanding of your family was wrong? That the woman you've been trying to win over for decades has never seen you as truly belonging? Instead of texting back, I called her. Jessica picked up on the second ring. "Hey, how's it going with the family? Did your grandmother love the photo album you made her?" I had spent weeks putting together a beautiful photo album chronicling my grandmother's life, carefully selecting pictures that showed our family history, including many photos of me and her together over the years. I had written thoughtful captions, organized everything chronologically, even had it professionally bound. I had hoped it would be something she would treasure, a gesture that might finally bridge the gap between us. "Jess," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "Something happened. What's wrong? You sound upset." I took a deep breath and told her about the overheard conversation, about my grandmother's whispered words, about the sudden clarity that had washed over me. Jessica listened without interrupting, occasional small gasps the only indication that she was still there. When I finished, there was a long silence. Finally Jessica spoke. "Emma, I'm so sorry, that's awful. What are you going to do?" It was a good question, one I didn't have an answer for. What do you do when you discover that your entire relationship with a family member has been based on a lie? When you realize that the love you've been seeking was never really available to you, not because of anything you did wrong, but because of circumstances beyond your control. "I don't know," I admitted. "I feel like everything I thought I knew about my family is wrong, like I've been living in some kind of delusion." "Have you talked to your dad about this?" Jessica asked gently. "Not yet, I don't even know what to ask him." "Hey Dad, am I actually your daughter?" It sounds crazy even saying it out loud. But you deserve to know the truth, Emma. Whatever it is, you have a right to understand your own history. She was right, but the thought of confronting my father terrified me. What if the truth was worse than I imagined? What if it changed everything between us two? My relationship with my father was one of the few family connections I had always been able to count on. The thought of jeopardizing that felt unbearable. Through the porch window, I could see the party continuing inside. My grandmother was cutting her birthday cake while everyone gathered around, phones out to capture the moment. Sarah stood right beside her, the two of them looking so happy and connected. I wondered if I had ever shared a moment like that with my grandmother, if there had ever been a time when she looked at me with that same unguarded affection. A memory surfaced from when I was maybe 10 years old. I had spent the entire day helping my grandmother bake cookies for a church fundraiser, carefully measuring ingredients, and decorating each cookie with painstaking attention to detail. I had been so proud of our work, so happy to be spending time with her, contributing to something important. But when people at the church complimented the cookies, she had only mentioned Sarah's help from the previous year, not acknowledging my contribution at all. At the time I had felt confused and hurt, but had pushed the feelings down, telling myself I was being too sensitive. Now I understood that even my genuine efforts to connect with her had been diminished by whatever truth she was carrying about my identity. Another memory, my high school graduation. My grandmother had attended, had taken photos, had congratulated me appropriately. But there had been something perfunctory about it, as if she was going through the motions rather than genuinely celebrating my achievement. When Sarah had graduated 2 years earlier, my grandmother had thrown her a party, invited the extended family, made a big production of her pride in Sarah's accomplishments. The pattern was everywhere, once I started looking for it. Birthday parties where Sarah got elaborate celebrations while I got dinner at a chain restaurant. Christmas mornings where Sarah's gifts were carefully chosen and expensive while mine felt like afterthoughts. Family vacations where Sarah was included in the planning while I was informed of the details after everything had been decided. I had internalized all of this differential treatment as my own failing, assuming that I wasn't interesting enough, successful enough, or lovable enough to merit the same attention. It had shaped my self-concept in profound ways, making me believe that I had to work twice as hard to earn what others received naturally. I had developed a people-pleasing personality, always trying to anticipate what others needed, always putting their comfort before my own. Now I understood that no amount of effort would have changed my grandmother's feelings toward me, because they weren't based on anything I could control. She had decided long ago that I wasn't truly family, and nothing I did could alter that fundamental judgment. The sliding door behind me opened, and my father stepped out onto the porch. "There you are," he said with a smile. "Your grandmother was asking about you. She wants to show you the photo album you made her." I turned to face him, this man who had raised me, loved me, supported me through everything. Looking at him now, I searched his features for clues I might have missed, signs that might explain my grandmother's cruel words. He looked puzzled by my serious expression. "Dad," I said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" I opened my mouth to ask the question that could change everything between us, then lost my nerve. "Never mind, it's not important."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
He studied my face with concern. "Emma, you look upset. What's wrong?" Before I could answer, my grandmother appeared in the doorway behind him. "There she is," she exclaimed with false brightness. "Emma, dear, I want to thank you for that lovely photo album. It's such a thoughtful gift." The words felt hollow, performed for my father's benefit rather than genuine appreciation. I managed a weak smile. "I'm glad you like it, Grandma. Why don't you come back inside? We're about to serve the cake, and I know everyone would love to spend more time with you." The irony was almost laughable. After 26 years of making me feel like an outsider, she was now performing the role of the loving grandmother, probably because my father was watching. I wondered how many other moments had been performance rather than genuine affection. "I'll be in shortly," I said, hoping my voice sounded normal. My grandmother nodded and went back inside, but my father lingered on the porch. "Emma, something's bothering you. I can tell. Talk to me." Looking into his kind eyes, the same eyes I had trusted my entire life, I made a decision. If I was going to learn the truth, it had to start somewhere. And despite my fears, I knew that my father was the one person in my family who had never made me question my worth or my place. "Dad," I said, taking a deep breath, "I overheard something tonight. Something that made me wonder about our family history." His expression shifted subtly, becoming more guarded. "What kind of something?" "Grandma was talking to Aunt Carol in the kitchen," she said. I paused, the words still difficult to say out loud. "She said, I'm not their real granddaughter, that they've been pretending otherwise." My father went very still, the color drained from his face, and for a moment he looked like he might be sick. That reaction told me everything I needed to know. Whatever secret my grandmother had been keeping, my father was aware of it too. "Oh, Emma," he said quietly, "I'm so sorry you heard that. So it's true." My voice came out as barely a whisper. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from childhood, whenever he was stressed or trying to figure out how to handle a difficult situation. It's complicated. What does that mean? Am I adopted? Are you not my biological father? No, sweetheart. I am absolutely your father. That has never been in question. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by confusion. Then what did she mean? My father looked back toward the house, where the party was still going strong, then at me with an expression full of pain and regret. There are things about your mother's family that I probably should have told you a long time ago. Things I thought wouldn't matter, that I hoped wouldn't matter. My heart started racing. What kind of things? He was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with how much to reveal. Your grandmother has always had very specific ideas about family, about bloodlines, about what makes someone truly belong. When your mother and I got married, there were complications. What kind of complications? Your mother wasn't from here, Emma. She was from a different background, a different culture. Your grandmother never fully accepted her, never fully welcomed her into the family. When you were born, those feelings didn't disappear. They transferred to you. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. What do you mean? Different culture. Different how? My father sighed deeply. Your mother was part Native American, Emma. Her grandmother was full-blooded Cherokee. It wasn't something she talked about much, because she had grown up in a family that had experienced discrimination, that had learned to hide that part of their heritage to avoid problems. The words hit me like a physical blow. 26 years of wondering what was wrong with me, why I didn't quite fit, why my grandmother treated me differently. And the answer was racism, pure, simple prejudice, that had shaped every interaction we'd ever had. She's been treating me this way because I'm part Native American. The question came out strangled. I'm afraid so. Your grandmother comes from a generation that, well, let's just say she has some very outdated ideas about race and family purity. When your mother died, and you came to live with us more often, I thought maybe time would change her perspective. I thought if she got to know you, love you for who you are, it wouldn't matter, but it did matter. It always mattered. Yes, he said quietly, and I'm sorry I didn't protect you from that better. I'm sorry I let you spend years wondering what was wrong with you when the problem was never you at all. I leaned against the porch railing, trying to process this information. Everything made sense now. The way my grandmother had always seemed slightly uncomfortable around me, the way she talked about our family, as if I was somehow separate from it, the way she had embraced Sarah so completely while keeping me at arm's length. Does Sarah know? I asked. I don't think so. This isn't something your grandmother would discuss openly. She probably assumes that everyone understands her perspective, without it needing to be stated explicitly. And Aunt Carol has always suspected, I think. She's asked me about it before, about why Mom treats you differently. But I've never confirmed it. I thought about all the times Aunt Carol had seemed extra kind to me, extra attentive. Had she been trying to compensate for her mother's prejudice? Had she known all along that I was being treated unfairly, but felt powerless to address it directly? Why didn't you ever tell me? I asked. Why didn't you prepare me for this? My father's shoulders sagged. Because I hoped it would get better. Because I thought if I just ignored it, if I just loved you enough to make up for it, maybe it wouldn't affect you. I know that sounds naive now. It does sound naive, Dad. I've spent my entire life thinking I was fundamentally flawed, that there was something wrong with me that made me unlovable to my own grandmother. Do you have any idea what that does to a person's self-worth? I know, and I'm sorry. I should have handled this differently. I should have been honest with you from the beginning. We stood in silence for a moment, both of us processing the weight of this revelation. Inside the house, I could hear laughter and conversation, the sounds of a family celebration that I now understood I had never truly been part of. Not because I wasn't worthy, but because my grandmother's prejudice had made my full participation impossible from the very beginning. There's something else, my father said hesitantly. Something else you should probably know. My heart sank. How could there be more? What? Your mother left you something. Several things, actually. Items from her family, from her Cherokee heritage. Your grandmother insisted I put them away after your mother died. Said they weren't appropriate for a young child. I've been keeping them in my closet all these years, waiting for the right time to share them with you. What kind of things? Jewelry that belonged to your mother's grandmother, some photographs of her family, a few traditional items that had been passed down through the generations. Your mother wanted you to have them, to know about that part of your heritage. I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and unfamiliar. She made you hide my mother's things. She made you hide my own heritage from me. She convinced me it was for the best, that it would only confuse you or make things harder for you. I was grieving and overwhelmed, and I trusted her judgment. I realize now that was a mistake. Dad, those things belong to me. That heritage belongs to me. She had no right to make that decision. You're absolutely right, and I should have stood up to her. I should have protected you, and honored your mother's wishes. The sliding door opened again, and this time it was Sarah who stepped out onto the porch. Hey, you two. Everyone's wondering where you disappeared to. Grandma wants to take family photos before people start heading home. Family photos. The irony was bitter. I looked at my cousin, this woman who had unknowingly benefited from my grandmother's prejudice, her entire life, who had received the love and acceptance that had been denied to me based on something as arbitrary as bloodline. We'll be right there, my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. Is everything okay? Emma, you look like you've been crying. I hadn't realized that tears had started falling. I wiped my cheeks quickly. Just family stuff. You know how it is. But Sarah didn't know how it was. Not really. She had never had to navigate the complicated dynamics of being unwanted, of being tolerated rather than embraced. Her experience of family had been straightforward, uncomplicated by prejudice or hidden truths. Well, come on, she said with a smile. Grandma specifically asked for photos with all her grandchildren. She seems really happy tonight. All her grandchildren. The phrase felt like a knife twist. I was included in that category, only for the purposes of photographs, for the appearance of family unity. But I knew now that in my grandmother's heart, I would always be something less than a real grandchild. As we walked back toward the house, my father caught my arm gently. Emma, we need to talk more about this. Soon there's a lot more you should know, and you have every right to know it all. I nodded, but my mind was already racing ahead, to what this revelation meant for my future relationship with my grandmother, with my extended family, with my own sense of identity. Everything I thought I knew about myself had shifted and I wasn't sure how to process it all. The party was still in full swing. When we returned to the living room, my grandmother was indeed organizing family photos, arranging people by height and relationship, making sure everyone looked their best. When she saw me, she smiled that same polite, distant smile I had been receiving my entire life. There you are, dear. Come stand over here next to Sarah for the grandchildren photo. I took my place as directed, but everything felt different now. The camera captured what looked like a happy family moment, but I knew the truth beneath the surface. I was there on sufferance, included for appearances but not truly accepted. The woman behind the camera saw me as an outsider, someone who didn't quite belong in the frame. As the photos were taken, and people began to say their goodbyes, I found myself studying each face in the room differently. How many of them knew the truth about my grandmother's feelings? How many had witnessed the differential treatment over the years, and chosen to say nothing? How many family gatherings had I attended, where I was the only one who didn't understand the undercurrent of prejudice that shaped how I was perceived? My Aunt Carol approached me as I was gathering my things to leave. Emma, honey, I hope you know how much you mean to this family. You're such a special person, and I'm proud to be your aunt. The words were kind, but they also felt loaded with meaning. I was only beginning to understand. Was she trying to counteract what she suspected I might have learned? Was this her way of apologizing for her mother's attitudes, without directly addressing them? Thank you, Aunt Carol. That means a lot. She squeezed my hand. If you ever need anything, or if you ever want to talk about family stuff, you know you can call me, right? I nodded, wondering if this was an invitation to discuss what I had discovered, or simply general support. Either way, I was grateful to know that not everyone in the family shared my grandmother's perspective. As I said goodbye to my grandmother, she hugged me with the same careful politeness she had always shown. "Thank you again for the photo album, dear. It was very thoughtful." "You're welcome, Grandma. Happy birthday." But looking at her now, knowing what I knew, the words felt empty. This woman had shaped so much of my self-perception through her rejection, had made me question my own worth for decades, all because of prejudice she had never bothered to examine or address. Walking to my car, I felt emotionally exhausted but also strangely liberated. The mystery that had haunted me my entire life had finally been solved. I wasn't fundamentally flawed or unlovable. I had simply been the victim of an older generation's racism, prejudice that had been allowed to flourish unchecked within my own family. The drive home gave me time to think about what came next. I had a lot of questions for my father, a lot of history to uncover about my mother's family and my own heritage. I had decisions to make about how to handle my relationship with my grandmother going forward, now that I understood the true nature of her feelings toward me. But for the first time in my adult life, I also had clarity. The burden of trying to earn love from someone who was incapable of giving it to me could finally be lifted. I could stop wondering what was wrong with me and start focusing on who I really was, including the parts of my identity that had been hidden from me. 3 days passed before I could bring myself to call my father. Those 72 hours felt like living in suspended animation, going through the motions of my normal routine, while my entire understanding of myself underwent a complete reconstruction. I went to work at the library, helped kids find books, organized storytime sessions, but everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else live my life. When I finally did call him, my voice came out steadier than I expected. "Dad, I think we need to have that conversation now. About Mom's family, about the things you've been keeping from me." There was a pause, then a heavy sigh. "You're right. Can you come over this weekend? This isn't really a phone conversation." Saturday morning found me sitting at my father's kitchen table, the same table where I had done homework as a child, where we had shared countless meals, where he had held me when I cried about scraped knees and broken friendships. The familiarity of the space felt both comforting and strange, like returning to a childhood home that had been rearranged in your absence. My father emerged from his bedroom, carrying a medium-sized wooden box that I had never seen before. The wood was dark and polished, with intricate carvings along the edges that looked like they might be Native American designs. He set it on the table between us with the care of someone handling something precious. "This belonged to your mother," he said softly. "Everything in here is part of your heritage, part of who you are. I should have given this to you years ago." I stared at the box, afraid to touch it. For 26 years, I had lived with only fragments of knowledge about my mother. She had died when I was so young that my memories of her were more like impressions than actual recollections. The smell of her perfume, the sound of her laughter, the way she used to braid my hair before school. My father had shared some stories over the years, but always in broad strokes, never the specific details that make a person real. "Tell me about her family first," I said. "Tell me what you've never told me." My father leaned back in his chair, his expression distant as he traveled back in time. "Your mother's name was Maria Elena Redhawk before she married me. She was born on a reservation in Oklahoma, but her family moved to the city when she was 12. Her grandmother, your great-grandmother, was a full-blooded Cherokee woman named Rose Redhawk. She was a healer, what they called a medicine woman in their community." The name Redhawk hit me like a physical blow. I had gone through my entire life as Emma Mitchell, never knowing that I carried the name of a Cherokee medicine woman in my bloodline. Why didn't I know any of this? Why didn't anyone ever tell me her real name? Because your grandmother Patricia made it very clear from the beginning that she didn't want those connections acknowledged. When your mother and I got engaged, Patricia actually tried to talk me out of the marriage. She said I was making a mistake, that I should find someone more suitable, someone who would fit better with our family. I felt sick to my stomach. "And you still married her anyway." "Of course I did. I loved your mother more than I had ever loved anyone. She was brilliant, funny, kind, beautiful inside and out." The fact that my mother couldn't see that said everything about her character, not your mother's. "But you let Grandma influence how you raised me afterward." My father's face crumpled with guilt. I did, and that's something I'll regret for the rest of my life. When your mother died, I was devastated. I couldn't function, couldn't think straight. Your grandmother stepped in to help with you, and I was so grateful for the support that I didn't question her methods. When she suggested putting away your mother's things, when she said it would be easier for you to assimilate if you didn't know about your Cherokee heritage, I was too broken to fight her. She convinced you to hide my identity from me. She convinced me that it would protect you from discrimination, that you would have an easier life if you just blended in as a regular white kid. She said people would treat you differently if they knew, and she wasn't entirely wrong about that. But what I failed to understand was that hiding who you are can be just as damaging as facing prejudice head-on. I reached for the wooden box, my hands trembling slightly. What's in here? Open it and see. The lid lifted easily, revealing contents that took my breath away. There were several pieces of jewelry, including a silver necklace with a turquoise stone carved in the shape of a feather. There were photographs, old ones with sepia tones, showing people who shared my facial features in ways I had never noticed before. There was a small leather journal filled with handwriting I didn't recognize, and several small items that looked like they might be ceremonial or spiritual in nature. The necklace belonged to Rose Redhawk, my father explained. Your mother wore it on our wedding day. She always said it would be yours, when you were old enough to understand its significance. I lifted the necklace from the box, feeling the weight of generations in my palm. The turquoise was a beautiful blue-green color, and the feather carving was so detailed it looked like it might take flight. As I held it, I felt connected to something larger than myself, for the first time in my life. What about the journal? That's your great-grandmother's. Rose kept a record of her healing practices, her spiritual beliefs, stories about your family's history. Your mother translated some of it into English, but a lot of it is still in Cherokee. She was hoping to teach you the language when you got older. I opened the journal carefully, seeing pages filled with symbols and words I couldn't read, interspersed with my mother's familiar handwriting. Even though I couldn't understand most of it, something about seeing those pages felt like coming home. There's more, my father said, reaching into the box to pull out a small bundle wrapped in soft cloth. This is sage, blessed by Rose Redhawk before she died. Your mother used to burn it when she needed guidance or wanted to feel connected to her ancestors. And this, he pulled out another item, is a piece of pottery that's been in your family for 4 generations. Each item felt like a piece of myself that had been missing. I had grown up feeling disconnected from any cultural traditions, envying friends who had strong ethnic identities or family customs that went back generations. Now I discovered that I had all of that and more, but it had been systematically hidden from me, by people who thought they knew what was best for my life. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. He nodded solemnly. Anything. How much of my life has been shaped by Grandma's racism? How many opportunities or experiences did I miss, because she was trying to hide my heritage? My father was quiet for a long time, clearly struggling with how much to reveal. More than I want to admit. When you were little, you used to ask questions about your mother's family, about why you looked different from some of your cousins. Your grandmother would change the subject or distract you with something else. She discouraged me from answering those questions directly. What about medical history? Are there things I should know about my Cherokee side for health reasons? Yes, actually, there are some genetic factors that are more common in Native American populations. Your mother's family has a history of diabetes, and there are certain medications that can affect Native Americans differently. I should have made sure your doctors knew about your heritage. I felt a flash of anger so intense it surprised me. Dad, that's not just cultural erasure, that's potentially dangerous. What if I had needed medical treatment, and my doctors didn't have complete information about my genetic background? I know. I've thought about that many times over the years. I kept telling myself, I would tell you everything when you were older, when you were ready, but the years kept passing, and it became harder and harder to bring up. When were you planning to tell me? When I got married? When I had kids? When would I have been old enough in your opinion? I don't know, he admitted. I kept waiting for the right moment, and there never seemed to be one. Your grandmother made it clear that she thought this information would only cause problems for you, and I was cowardly enough to take the easy path. I set the journal down and looked directly at my father. I need you to understand something. This decision didn't protect me from discrimination. I've been experiencing discrimination my entire life, from my own grandmother. The only difference is that I didn't know why. I thought there was something fundamentally wrong with me, that I was somehow defective or unlovable. Do you have any idea how damaging that has been to my self-esteem? My father's eyes filled with tears. Emma, I am so sorry. I thought I was protecting you, but I can see now that I was just protecting myself from having difficult conversations. And now I'm 26 years old, and I have to rebuild my entire understanding of who I am. I have to learn about my own culture from scratch, like a tourist in my own heritage. I'll help you, he said quickly. We can learn together. I can tell you everything I remember about your mother's family, about their traditions and beliefs. We can connect with Cherokee communities, find people who can teach you things I never learned. That's not the point, Dad. The point is that this should have been my choice. I should have grown up knowing who I was, being proud of my heritage, having a connection to my culture. Instead, I've spent my entire adult life feeling like I don't quite fit anywhere, like I'm somehow incomplete. We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing the weight of this conversation. I continued to examine the items in the box, each one representing a piece of my identity that had been kept from me. There were more photographs, including one of my mother as a young woman wearing traditional Cherokee clothing. She looked radiant, proud, completely comfortable in her own skin in a way I had never learned to be. There's something else I need to tell you, my father said eventually, about your grandmother's reaction to all of this. I looked up from the photographs. What do you mean? She knows I have this box. She knows that I've kept your mother's things all these years. A few months ago, she asked me when I was planning to throw them away, said it wasn't healthy to hold on to the past. She wanted you to throw away my mother's belongings. She said they served no purpose, that they would only confuse you if you ever found them. She suggested I donate them to a museum, or something, get them out of the house entirely. I felt that familiar surge of anger, but this time it was mixed with something else, something that felt like determination. What did you tell her? I told her they weren't hers to dispose of, that they belonged to you and always had. That's when she said something that really bothered me. What? She said that you were better off not knowing about that side of your family, that you had turned out fine without it, and that bringing it up now would only cause problems. She said some people were better off not digging too deep into their family history. Some people, meaning people like me. I think that's what she meant, yes. I carefully placed the photographs back in the box and closed the lid, but kept the turquoise necklace in my hands. Wearing it felt like reclaiming something that had always belonged to me. Dad, I need to make something clear. I'm not going to pretend this conversation never happened. I'm not going to go back to family gatherings and act like everything is normal. I can't unknow what I know now. I understand that. What are you thinking of doing? I don't know yet, but I'm not going to protect Grandma's feelings anymore. If she's uncomfortable with who I am, with my heritage, that's her problem to deal with. I'm done making myself smaller, to accommodate her prejudice. My father nodded slowly. I think that's probably the healthiest approach, even if it makes family gatherings more complicated. Family gatherings have been complicated for me my entire life. The only difference now is that I understand why. Over the next hour, my father shared more stories about my mother's family. He told me about Rose Redhawk's reputation as a healer, about the way people would travel from other reservations to seek her help. He told me about my mother's childhood, growing up between two worlds, learning to navigate both Cherokee traditions and mainstream American culture. Your mother was proud of her heritage, he said. She never tried to hide it or minimize it. When we met, she was very upfront about her background, about what it meant to her. She said she wouldn't be with someone who couldn't accept and respect that part of her identity. And you did accept it. I did more than accept it. I was fascinated by it. I wanted to learn everything I could about Cherokee culture, about your mother's family traditions. She was teaching me some of the language before she died. You know Cherokee words. A few basic ones. Nothing like what your mother could speak, but some. She was fluent. Rose Redhawk had insisted that all her grandchildren learn the language, said it was the only way to keep their culture alive. I felt a profound sense of loss, not just for my mother, but for all the knowledge and traditions that should have been passed down to me. I should have grown up bilingual. I should have known my great-grandmother's stories, learned about medicinal plants, understood the spiritual practices that were part of my heritage. You're right, you should have. And I'm sorry that my choices prevented that from happening. What else did Grandma influence? What other decisions did you make based on her opinions about my heritage? My father looked uncomfortable. When you were in elementary school, there was a project about family heritage. You were supposed to research your background and present it to the class. You were excited about it, asking me questions about where our family came from. I remember that project. You helped me make a poster about Ireland and England, about the Mitchell family history. Right, but you had also asked about your mother's side. You wanted to include information about her family too. Your grandmother said it would be inappropriate, that it might make you a target for teasing or discrimination. She convinced me to focus only on my side of the family. I remembered that project vividly. I had been proud of the poster we made, but I had also felt like something was missing, like I was only presenting half of myself. Now I understood why. So even in elementary school, I was being taught to hide part of who I was. Yes, and I should have recognized how wrong that was at the time. What about when I got older? Were there other instances? In high school, you expressed interest in learning about Native American history. You wanted to take an elective course about indigenous cultures. Your grandmother said it was a waste of time, that you should focus on more practical subjects. I didn't override her advice the way I should have. I could have been learning about my own culture in school, connecting with other Native students, understanding the historical context of my family's experiences. You could have, and you should have had that opportunity. I was beginning to understand the full scope of what had been taken from me. It wasn't just family artifacts or stories, it was educational opportunities, cultural connections, a fundamental understanding of who I was, and where I came from. Every time I had shown natural curiosity about Native American culture or history, it had been discouraged or redirected. Dad, I need to ask you something difficult. Okay, do you think Grandma would have treated me differently if I had been a boy? If I had been a grandson instead of a granddaughter? He thought about this for a long time. Honestly, I think her prejudice would have been the same, but she might have been more invested in trying to change you, trying to mold you into what she considered acceptable. With you being a girl, I think she wrote you off more easily, decided you were less important to the family legacy. That's even worse. I know, the intersection of racism and sexism made her treatment of you particularly cruel. We talked for another hour, with my father sharing more memories and filling in details about my heritage that I had never known. By the time I left his house that afternoon, I had a clearer picture of who my mother had been, what my Cherokee lineage meant, and how systematically it had all been hidden from me. But I also had something else, a plan. I wasn't going to let this knowledge remain secret any longer. I was going to learn everything I could about Cherokee culture, connect with my heritage in ways that had been denied to me growing up. And I was going to stop pretending that my grandmother's treatment of me was acceptable. The next few weeks became a period of intensive research and self-discovery. I contacted Cherokee cultural centers, read books about Native American history, started learning basic Cherokee words and phrases online. I reached out to Cherokee communities in my area, explaining my situation and asking for guidance about how to connect with my heritage as an adult. The response was overwhelmingly supportive. I discovered that my story was not uncommon, that many people with Native American ancestry had grown up disconnected from their culture due to historical trauma, family shame, or systematic suppression of indigenous identity. There were resources available for people like me, programs designed to help adults reconnect with their tribal heritage. I also started wearing my great-grandmother's turquoise necklace every day. It became a visible symbol of my reclaimed identity, a way of honoring the part of myself that had been hidden for so long. People noticed it, complimented it, and I began telling them about its significance, about my Cherokee heritage, about my great-grandmother, the medicine woman. Each time I shared this information, I felt stronger, more complete. I was no longer hiding part of who I was to make other people comfortable. If they had problems with my heritage, that was their issue to deal with, not mine. 3 weeks after my conversation with my father, my phone rang. It was my grandmother. Emma, dear, I was hoping we could get together for lunch soon. It's been too long since we've had a chance to talk, just the two of us. The timing was suspicious. My father had probably told her about our conversation, about the fact that I now knew the truth about my heritage, and her role in hiding it from me. This lunch invitation was likely damage control, an attempt to manage the situation before it got out of hand. I'm pretty busy with work right now, Grandma. Oh, I'm sure we can find a time that works. How about this Saturday? I know a lovely little place downtown that serves excellent salads. Her persistence confirmed my suspicion that this wasn't a casual social invitation. She had an agenda, and I could guess what it was. She wanted to gauge how much I knew, and try to convince me to keep quiet about it, to maintain the status quo that had served her comfort for 26 years. Actually, Grandma, if you want to talk to me, I think it should be at your house. And I think Dad should be there too. There was a pause. Oh, I don't think that's necessary. This is just a casual lunch between grandmother and granddaughter. No, it's not. We both know why you're calling, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise anymore. Another pause, longer this time. I'm not sure what you mean. I mean that I know about my mother's family. I know about my Cherokee heritage. I know about Rose Redhawk and everything that's been hidden from me my entire life. And I know why you've treated me differently from Sarah all these years. Silence stretched between us. When she finally spoke, her voice was cooler, more controlled. I see. And what exactly do you plan to do with this information? The question revealed everything. She wasn't calling to apologize or to make amends. She was calling to assess the threat level, to figure out whether her prejudice was about to become a public family scandal. I plan to live as who I really am, Grandma. I plan to embrace my heritage and stop pretending to be someone I'm not to make you comfortable. Emma, I think you're being very dramatic about this. Your father has filled your head with romantic notions about your mother's background, but the reality is much more complicated. Complicated how? Native Americans face challenges in this world. I was trying to protect you from that by helping you assimilate into mainstream society. I thought if you didn't know about that background, you could avoid some of the difficulties that come with it. You mean you were trying to protect yourself from the embarrassment of having a Native American granddaughter? That's not fair, isn't it? You've treated me like an outsider my entire life. You've made me feel unwanted and unworthy because of who I am. You've hidden my own identity from me, and convinced my father to do the same. How is any of that protecting me? You turned out fine, didn't you? You have a good job, a nice life. You've never experienced the kind of discrimination that your mother's family faced. I've experienced discrimination from you, Grandma. Every family gathering, every birthday, every holiday, where you treated Sarah like she was precious while treating me like I was an inconvenience. That was discrimination too. I've always been fair to both of you girls. The blatant denial was breathtaking. No, you haven't. And now I understand why. Emma, I think you're overreacting to this whole situation. Yes, your mother had some Native American ancestry, but that doesn't define who you are. You're a Mitchell. You were raised as a Mitchell. This other stuff is just background noise. It's not background noise to me. It's my heritage, my culture, my identity, and I'm going to embrace it whether you approve or not. I just think you should be careful about making too much of this. People have certain ideas about Native Americans, certain stereotypes. You don't want to invite that kind of judgment into your life. The only judgment I'm worried about is yours, Grandma, and frankly I'm done caring about that too. There was a long silence. When she spoke again, her voice had taken on a harder edge. I hope you'll think carefully about how you handle this, Emma. Family harmony is important, and stirring up old issues isn't going to benefit anyone. Whose family harmony? It's certainly never benefited me. I think we should table this conversation for now. Perhaps when you've had time to think about it more rationally, we can discuss it again. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there holding my phone, not surprised by her reaction, but still disappointed by it. Part of me had hoped that confronting her directly might lead to some kind of acknowledgement, some recognition that she had treated me unfairly. Instead, she had doubled down on her position, framing her prejudice as protection and my desire to know my own heritage as overreaction. That evening my father called. "Your grandmother told me about your conversation today." "I'm sure she did. Let me guess. She thinks I'm being dramatic and ungrateful." "Something like that. She also said she's concerned that you're making a mistake by dwelling on this Native American stuff." Her words, not mine. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her that you have every right to know about your heritage, and that she's lucky you're willing to speak to her at all after what she's put you through." I was surprised. "You stood up to her." "I did. I should have done it 26 years ago, but I did it today. I told her that her attitude toward your mother and toward you has been unacceptable, and that if she wants to have any relationship with you going forward, she needs to examine her own prejudices." "How did she take that?" "About as well as you'd expect. She said I was being influenced by your emotional reaction, that I wasn't thinking clearly about what's best for the family." "What did you say to that?" "I said that what's best for the family is treating all family members with respect and dignity, regardless of their ethnic background. I said that her failure to do that has damaged you and damaged our family relationships." I felt a wave of gratitude toward my father. It was 26 years late, but he was finally standing up for me, finally recognizing the harm that had been done, and taking responsibility for his part in it. "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot. It's the least I could do. I just wish I had been brave enough to do it sooner." "What happens now?" "With the family, I don't know. Your grandmother is pretty set in her ways, and I don't think she's going to suddenly develop an enlightened perspective on race relations. But you shouldn't have to keep hiding who you are to accommodate her limitations." "I'm not going to. I'm done with that."
Good. And Emma?
"I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Your mother would be proud too. You're standing up for yourself in a way that takes real courage." After we hung up, I sat in my living room looking at the Cherokee artifacts spread across my coffee table. I was learning to read some of the symbols in my great-grandmother's journal, connecting with online communities of Cherokee language learners, planning a trip to visit Cherokee historical sites. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was becoming the person I was meant to be. A week later I got a text from Sarah. "Hey, Grandma mentioned you guys had some kind of disagreement. Is everything okay?" She seemed pretty upset about it. I stared at the message for a long time. Sarah had no idea what had been going on, no clue about the racism that had shaped our family dynamics for decades. She had benefited from our grandmother's favoritism without ever realizing it, had received love and acceptance that was denied to me based purely on ancestry. Part of me wanted to protect her from this knowledge, to let her continue believing that our grandmother was the loving, fair-minded woman she appeared to be. But another part of me was tired of protecting people from uncomfortable truths, tired of making myself smaller to preserve other people's comfort. I called her instead of texting back. "Emma, I'm so glad you called. What's going on with you and Grandma?" She wouldn't give me details, just said you were going through some kind of phase. "Sarah, there's something about our family that you don't know. Something that I just found out myself, and I think it's time you knew the truth too." Sarah's silence stretched across the phone line after I finished explaining everything. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper.
Emma, I had no idea. I swear I didn't know any of this.
"I believe you," I said, and I meant it. Sarah had grown up receiving unconditional love from our grandmother, never having reason to question the favoritism or examine the underlying causes. She had lived in a completely different reality from mine. But now that you're telling me this, things are starting to make sense. The way Grandma always seemed more excited about my achievements, the way she would change the subject when you talked about cultural things you were interested in. I thought it was just personality differences. "It wasn't your fault, Sarah. You didn't ask to be treated better and you couldn't have known why it was happening. But I could have noticed more. I could have spoken up when I saw the difference in how she treated us." "God, Emma, I feel terrible." "Don't. You were just living your life. The person who should feel terrible is Grandma, and apparently she doesn't." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do now?" "I'm going to stop pretending. I'm not going to hide my heritage anymore, and I'm not going to tolerate being treated like a second-class family member. If that makes family gatherings uncomfortable, so be it. Do you want me to talk to her?" Maybe if I brought it up, she'd listen. "That's kind of you to offer, but this isn't your fight. This is between me and her." 2 months passed before the next family gathering. My Aunt Carol's birthday provided the occasion, and everyone was expected to attend the usual celebration at my grandmother's house. I debated not going, but ultimately decided that avoiding family events would feel too much like letting my grandmother win. I arrived wearing my great-grandmother's turquoise necklace prominently displayed, along with a silver bracelet I had purchased from a Cherokee artisan. I had also brought something special, a framed photograph of my mother in traditional Cherokee dress that my father had helped me enlarge and professionally mounted. The moment I walked into my grandmother's living room, I could feel the tension. She greeted me with the same polite distance she had always maintained, but there was something sharper in her eyes now, a wariness that hadn't been there before. Sarah hugged me extra tightly when she saw me, whispering "I love you" in my ear. My father stayed close to my side, a show of solidarity that felt both protective and apologetic. "Emma dear, that's an interesting necklace," my grandmother said, her tone carefully neutral. "Thank you, it belonged to my great-grandmother, Rose Redhawk. She was a Cherokee medicine woman." The room went quiet. Several relatives looked confused by this information, clearly hearing about my Native American heritage for the first time. My grandmother's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "How lovely," she said in a voice that suggested it was anything but. I had brought the photograph for a specific purpose, and during the gift-opening portion of the evening, I presented it to my Aunt Carol. "This is for you, Aunt Carol. It's a picture of my mother that I thought you might like to have." Carol's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the image. "Oh, Emma, she was so beautiful. Look at that traditional clothing, those beautiful patterns. She looks so proud and strong." She was proud of her Cherokee heritage, I said clearly, making sure everyone in the room could hear. "I'm learning more about that part of my family history, the part I never knew about growing up." The reactions around the room were varied. Some relatives seemed genuinely interested, asking questions about Cherokee culture and my mother's family. Others looked uncomfortable, glancing between me and my grandmother as if sensing an undercurrent they didn't understand. My grandmother remained silent during this exchange, but I could see her growing more tense with each question I answered about my heritage. When someone asked about Cherokee traditions and I mentioned smudging with sage, her control finally slipped. "I think that's enough talk about ancient history," she said, her voice cutting through the conversation. "Let's focus on celebrating Carol's birthday instead of dwelling on things that don't really matter anymore." The dismissal was so blatant, so rude that several people looked shocked. My Aunt Carol's expression hardened as she looked at her mother. "Actually, Mom, I think Emma's heritage is fascinating and absolutely relevant. Maria was family, and learning about her background helps us understand our family better. Some things are better left in the past," my grandmother replied stiffly. "Like racism?" I asked quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. The room went dead silent. My grandmother's face flushed red, but whether from anger or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. "I don't think this is the appropriate time or place for that kind of accusation," she said. "When would be appropriate? After another 26 years of treating me like I don't belong." "Emma," she said, her voice taking on a warning tone. "You're being very dramatic." "Am I? Because I think it's pretty dramatic to hide a child's entire cultural heritage from them. I think it's dramatic to treat your granddaughter differently because of her ethnic background. I think it's dramatic to call someone's Native American ancestry things that don't really matter." My cousin Liam, who had always been observant, spoke up. "Wait, is this why you've always treated Emma differently, Grandma? Because she's part Native American?" "I have not treated anyone differently," my grandmother said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Yes, you have," Sarah said suddenly, surprising everyone including me. "Emma's right. I've seen it my whole life, I just never understood why. The different birthday celebrations, the different level of interest in our lives, the way you've always seemed more invested in my success than hers. I thought it was just personality differences, but now I see it was something else entirely." "Sarah, you don't understand the complexities of the situation," my grandmother began. "Then explain it to me," Sarah challenged. "Explain how Emma's Cherokee heritage justifies treating her like she's less important than me." My grandmother looked around the room at faces that were no longer sympathetic or understanding. For the first time in her life, she was being called to account for her prejudice by multiple family members, not just the granddaughter she had marginalized. This is ridiculous, she said finally. I've always been fair to both girls. If Emma feels otherwise, that's her perception, not reality. Grandma, I said, standing up and walking over to where she sat. 3 months ago, I heard you tell Aunt Carol that I'm not your real granddaughter. You said you didn't know why the family keeps pretending otherwise. Would you like to explain that comment? Her face went white. She clearly hadn't realized I had overheard that conversation, and being confronted with her own words in front of the extended family left her with no room to maneuver. That was taken out of context. What context makes it acceptable to say that about your granddaughter? She didn't answer, couldn't answer, because there was no acceptable context for those words. My Aunt Carol's voice was cold when she spoke. Mom, did you really say that about Emma? It was a private conversation that was misunderstood. How could that be misunderstood? Carol demanded. Either you said it or you didn't. The silence that followed was deafening. My grandmother sat in her chair, surrounded by family members who were seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. The mask of loving grandmother had slipped, revealing the prejudice underneath. I think I should go, I said finally. I've said what I needed to say. Emma, wait, my Aunt Carol called out. You don't have to leave. This is family, and you belong here. Some people here don't seem to think so, I replied, looking directly at my grandmother. As I walked toward the door, something unexpected happened. One by one, other family members began standing up to leave as well. Sarah hugged me goodbye, and whispered that she would call me later. My cousin Liam shook my hand and said he was sorry for not speaking up sooner. My Aunt Carol announced that she was disappointed in her mother, and would be having her own birthday celebration next weekend, one where all family members were welcomed equally. By the time I reached my car, half the party had disbanded. My grandmother sat alone in her living room, surrounded by the remnants of a celebration that had turned into a reckoning. My father caught up with me in the driveway. I'm proud of you, he said. That took courage. It took 26 years, I replied. I should have done it sooner. You did it when you were ready. That's what matters. 6 months later, I received an invitation to my grandmother's 80th birthday party. The invitation was formal, impersonal, the kind you might send to a distant acquaintance. There was no personal note, no acknowledgement of everything that had happened between us. I didn't go. Instead, I spent that weekend at a Cherokee cultural festival, learning traditional dances and listening to elders share stories about our history. I wore my great-grandmother's necklace, and felt connected to something larger than myself, something that had nothing to do with the approval or disapproval of people who couldn't see past their own prejudices. I heard through the family grapevine that my grandmother's birthday party was sparsely attended. Many relatives had chosen to distance themselves from her, after learning about her treatment of me. She had lost more than just my presence. She had lost the respect of much of the family. A year later, I got a call from my Aunt Carol. Your grandmother is in the hospital, she said. She's asking for you. What's wrong with her? She had a stroke. She's stable, but the doctors aren't sure about long-term effects. She specifically asked me to call you. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Despite everything, this woman had been a significant figure in my life for 26 years. But I also knew that her request to see me was likely motivated by fear, rather than genuine desire to make amends. Has she said anything about wanting to apologize or make things right? There was a pause. Not exactly. She said she wanted to explain things to you, to help you understand her perspective. Even facing her own mortality, my grandmother couldn't bring herself to acknowledge wrongdoing. She wanted understanding and forgiveness without offering genuine accountability. I appreciate you calling, Aunt Carol, but I don't think a hospital visit would be good for either of us. If she wants to explain her perspective, she can write me a letter when she's feeling better. Are you sure? This might be your last chance to talk to her. I'm sure I made peace with this situation a long time ago. I don't need her validation or her explanations. That letter never came. My grandmother recovered from her stroke with minimal lasting effects, but she never reached out to me directly. Through family updates, I learned that she continued to maintain that she had done nothing wrong, that I was oversensitive and ungrateful. 2 years after that hospital stay, I found myself at a Cherokee language immersion weekend, surrounded by people who shared my heritage and understood the importance of cultural connection. I had become fluent in basic Cherokee, learned traditional crafts from my great-grandmother's journal, and developed relationships with other people who were reclaiming their indigenous identity. During a sharing circle, I told my story about growing up disconnected from my culture, about the family racism that had shaped my childhood, about the journey of reclaiming my identity as an adult. When I finished, an elderly Cherokee woman approached me. "Your great-grandmother would be proud," she said simply. Rose Redhawk's granddaughter has found her way home. For the first time since this whole journey began, I felt truly at peace. I had spent so many years seeking validation from people who couldn't give it, trying to earn love from someone who had already decided I wasn't worthy of it. But I had found something better than my grandmother's approval. I had found myself. 6 months ago, I received news that my grandmother had passed away in her sleep. I attended the funeral, not out of grief, but out of respect for other family members who were mourning. I wore my Cherokee jewelry proudly, and when people asked about it, I told them about my heritage without hesitation or shame. At the reception afterward, several relatives approached me to apologize for not speaking up sooner, for not recognizing the discrimination I had faced. Sarah gave a speech about family love and acceptance that felt like a public repudiation of our grandmother's prejudice. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the long journey that had brought me to this point. I had lost a grandmother, but I had gained something far more valuable. I had gained myself, my heritage, my pride, and my refusal to accept less than I deserved from the people in my life. My grandmother died believing she had been justified in her treatment of me. She never acknowledged the harm she had caused or expressed genuine remorse for her prejudice. But her inability to change didn't diminish my own transformation. Today I work as a cultural liaison for Cherokee students in local schools, helping kids stay connected to their heritage while navigating mainstream education. I've written articles about cultural identity and family racism for Native American publications. I've found my community, my purpose, and my peace. The turquoise necklace sits in a place of honor on my dresser, along with other Cherokee artifacts I've collected over the years. Every morning when I put it on, I remember Rose Redhawk, the strong medicine woman whose blood runs through my veins. I remember my mother, who was proud of her heritage and would have wanted me to embrace it. And I remember that some people will never be able to see past their own limitations to recognize the beauty and value in others. That's their loss, not mine. I am Cherokee, I am proud, and I am exactly who I was always meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.